Hi, everyone. I'm Carol Fleck, and on behalf of the ADDitude team, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled, Is Resentment Poisoning Your Relationship? Root out its source and move forward. Leading today's presentation is Melissa Orlov. Melissa is the founder of ADHDmarriage.com and ADHD and Marriage Consulting. Through her seminars, books, and consulting, she helps couples affected by ADHD rebalance their relationships and learn to thrive. Melissa has written 2 books about ADHD and relationships, including The ADHD Effect on Marriage. You can reach her at ADHDmarriage.com. Feelings of resentment are not uncommon in close relationships. Spend enough time and years together, and many couples are bound to grapple with lingering anger and disappointment. Of course, there are many reasons for this. Resentment might stem from an unresolved conflict, anger issues, an unequal partnership or unequal division of labor, trust issues, or something else. In relationships touched by ADHD, traits like forgetfulness, poor organization, and weak follow-through can hasten these feelings and chip away at intimacy. Melissa will explain how to address these feelings and communicate effectively without triggering your partner. She'll tell us how to let go of resentment and start healing. You might want to have a paper and pen handy because she'll also guide you in a thought-provoking exercise. We'd like to begin today's webinar by asking this poll question to our live audience. If resentment has crept into your close relationship, what was the main cause? Unbalanced partnership, such as a parent-child dynamic, one partner's anger issues or frequent outbursts, unequal division of labor, one partner's constant criticism, unresolved conflict, trust issues, or something else. Please select your answers and use the comment box under the video window to tell us more. For answers to common webinar questions about slides, transcripts, and certificates of attendance, click on the FAQ tab of your webinar screen. If you're curious about the articles we're working on for ADDitude Magazine's upcoming spring issue, I'm happy to share a few. ADDitude surveyed readers about the cost of ADHD care for themselves and their children. Read about how much they pay, what's covered by insurance and what isn't, and compare what you pay for ADHD care. Plus, if you're so done with your job, we got you. Our experts explain the career assessments that will help you find the right job right now. And you'll also want to check out our complete ADHD medication guide for adults, learn about optimal dosages, how to know if your medication is working, and more. Look for these and other articles in the upcoming spring issue of ADDitude Magazine. If you're not yet a subscriber, visit ADDitudemag.com/subscribe or click the Subscribe Now tab on your webinar screen. So without further ado, I'm so delighted to welcome Melissa Orlov. Thank you so much for joining us today, Melissa.
Thank you, Carol. I am so happy to be here. It's delightful. I'm going to jump right in because I have quite a bit of stuff to say, and I really want to get to your questions. I know there are many of them. So the very first thing that I wanted to talk about here was the difference between anger and resentment. So my job today, as I see it, is to help you think about your resentment in a slightly different way and provide you a path for doing so and some ways to talk to your partner, as Carol was saying, and then to answer your questions. So if you think about anger versus resentment, anger is episodic, right? It's something where there's a start to it. Typically, if it's not the chronic sort of longer term stuff, typically it is episodic. So it has a start, it has a high point, and then a relatively quick resolution. Resentment is what I like to think of as a long burn emotion. It stays with you. So one of the things that it does in your relationship is it provides almost a filter. You start to see your relationship through this resentment that you carry around. And as such, it can be very, very toxic to the relationship and to you. And one of the things that is clear about any kinds of emotions that you are feeling is that you are in charge of trying to figure out how to handle those emotions. So Let me just review a little bit of some common resentments. I would be very interested to see, Carol, the results of that poll. I have groups of folks in my website. We have a program called Intent to Action. And in that program, I ran a resentment program and talked with ADHD partners about what they most resent. And the number one resentment was, I feel like the family project, right? My partner doesn't respect how I do things or who I am. They're always telling me what to do. Has a lot for me to do that I can't, I don't have any time for myself, or I can't manage all those projects. And then I feel like a child in this relationship. So some of you who are familiar with my work know I talk a lot about what I call the parent-child dynamic. And it is one of the things that causes a lot of resentment in a relationship. Now, non-ADHD partners carry around their own set of resentments. And some of these have to do, many of them, with the presentation of ADHD and the symptomatic behaviors in their relationship. These include the inconsistency of ADHD, and particularly around projects, that translates over time into feeling as if their partner's not trustworthy. And the sort of behavioral response in many non-ADHD partners is to say, well, if I don't do it, it won't get done. I feel like I have to do everything, and I resent that. There's also responses to defensiveness or volatility. I know there's a lot of work at ADDitude magazine around RSD and around the emotional dysregulation of ADHD, and this feeling of having to walk on eggshells that results for both non-ADHD partners and for different reasons, ADHD partners. Again, the parent-child dynamic, I feel as if I have another child rather than a partner. And in fact, when I talk with professionals, that is one of those phrases which, if you are a professional and somebody walks into your office, a couple walks into your office and doesn't have ADHD diagnosed yet, that's one of those phrases that's a clue that somebody you should have a further conversation about whether ADHD might be there, because that is so common. And then there are some things about, my partner did something long ago and hasn't apologized for whatever reason. So those are some very common non-ADHD partner resentments as well. So lots of opportunity, and many, many couples struggle with resentments. And the ADHD symptomatic stuff, particularly around inconsistency and volatility, can add to that. Now, it's important to understand we are all in charge of our own feelings. There are no feelings that you shouldn't have, including anger or resentment. They are flags, essentially, saying, hey, there's something going on here that you need to deal with. And the feelings of resentment can be effectively addressed. So you are not in a position typically where you cannot move past your resentment. And in fact, really, to heal your relationship, you have to choose not to hold on to the resentment. It's almost impossible, actually, to heal a relationship when one or both partners are feeling resentment. So this is a very big topic. The feelings that you have around resentment, though, people tend to say, oh, well, my partner did X, which I resent, or I'm in a position that I don't like, and I resent being in that position. The blaming of the partner doesn't improve things, because you don't respond well when somebody is feeling very resentful towards you and telling you you must change because you'll solve their resentment. But also because you are the only person who can change your own emotions. So things are possibly more complicated than you think they are around your resentment. So that's part of what I'm going to be talking about here. So the very first thing I want you to do, Carol said, if you have a piece of paper here, great. I want you to take a moment, and I'm not going to give you a really long time, but just write down 1 to 3 things that you feel resentment about in your relationship, something that you carry around with you that you don't like, that you're resentful for. And I'm going to give you a minute to do this. So this is a way of illustrating to you how this process works. If you don't have paper, you can just think of them. That's fine too. Okay. A short minute. Okay. So the first step is identifying what are the things that you're feeling resentful for. And if I was doing this with a couple, lots of times I would actually do each person individually in the couple first and then bring them together. But the very first step is always identifying what are you feeling resentful about. Then the second step is to dig underneath it. So one of the things I like to talk about is how do you peel back the onion, right? Onions have lots of layers, and you get closer and closer to the heart of the onion as you go through those layers. And there are a lot of things that underlie resentment. So this is where you have to I like to sit back with a cup of coffee and put my feet up and start thinking about things. For example, if you are feeling resentful because you are saying, I feel as if I have to do stuff or it won't get done, is it possible that fear underpins that fear that it will always be this way, or perhaps exhaustion, or perhaps you had envisioned something different in your life, and now what you're finding is that you feel hopeless, or that your hopes for a different kind of partnership feel very far away. Maybe you feel resentful because you feel not good enough. Let's say you're in that childlike position in the parent-child dynamic, and you don't like somebody coming to you and correcting you or suggesting things for you or educating you. Some of the things that non-ADHD partners or more organized partners do when they are in that parenting managerial role. Maybe you resent those feelings that triggers. Maybe you feel as if you have low status in the relationship. You know, when ADHD partners say, I resent feeling like the family project, they don't want the spotlight on them to be all about their ADHD. They don't want to be constantly being fixed. This is what I'm told. And so, you know, maybe that's part of what's underneath as you start to peel back the onion. And what I encourage people to do when they are doing this peeling activity is to ask themselves, you know, what's under that? Okay, what's under that? So you might say the first layer of the onion is the resentment. The next layer down inside is fear. What's the fear about? Well, you know, the next layer down under that might be, I actually, if I really am honest with myself, fear that the relationship might end if I stand up for myself in this situation, or I fear that there's no end in sight and that I'm just going to constantly feel unresolved or hopeless or whatever. So do as many layers as you can as you're peeling it back to say, what's under that? What's under that? What's under that? And eventually you'll get to an insight, I hope, that is really about the motivational emotion that is underpinning this top level emotion of resentment. So step one is identifying the resentments. Step two is peeling back those layers and identifying the underlying emotions that are really what the resentment is about, right? It's not about your partner, though the actions of a partner might trigger some of those feelings. It's about what those actions trigger inside of you. So this is these are the steps that I'm trying to take you through. Identify, peel back that onion, actually is step two, then examining the benefits and identifying alternative responses, and then creating a plan. There's actually 5 steps here. I sort of concatenated the first 2. So you might ask a question about, like, wait, hold on. I don't feel as if my resentment holds any benefit to me whatsoever. And I want to challenge that, because we hold on to things in our lives often because they do confer a benefit. Maybe you hold on to a certain kind of, you know, arms out behavior because the benefit to you is you don't have to engage with a difficult feeling inside of you. The same thing holds true for resentment. One of the common benefits is feeling more powerful or in control at the moment. Or to put aside having to deal with your own feelings or your own role, feeling less anxious, right? If I go and take the control of this thing, if I go do it, then I alleviate the anxiety of not having this thing done. If I feel resentful about feeling like I'm the family project, I can externalize what's going on for me in terms of, oh, I have to deal with these ADHD symptoms, for example, versus looking inside and saying, what else do I need to do, even though this feels uncomfortable, right? So escaping from negative feelings and here's a really big one for non-ADHD partners that's sort of a resentment benefit, which is a sense that if you feel resentful or angry enough, you might affect positive change in your partner. Your partner might actually listen to you, is how people talk about it, or hear you and create the change that you are requesting. And sometimes if I'm feeling less generous, it's about my partner might start to feel uncomfortable enough that they feel they have to change. That's a less positive version of that. People aren't always there. And then sometimes, improved sense of feeling better about myself. Okay, I'm gonna cross over my partner's boundaries. I'm gonna do my partner's stuff, and it's okay. My actions are justified because otherwise it won't get done. So there are benefits to resentment, and one of the ways that you start to address your own resentment is to be clear-eyed about what the benefits are for you, because then you can say, am I really more powerful or in control in this moment? Or is this really an avoidance strategy? Yes, this addresses my anxiety in the moment, but what about the long-term impact on my relationship, right? You can acknowledge the benefit. You can acknowledge we're all human and we do this. But in fact, the longer-term issue is that it hurts you in particular and the relationship more generally. So it feels like a benefit in the moment, but isn't actually a benefit for the larger picture. So identifying alternative responses is then the next step that you would take, right? So it could be acceptance of, this is what my relationship is like. This is who my partner is. This is who I am. It could be learning conversations. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. It could be plans of actions, et cetera. The important thing here is to think in the positive. Saying, I'm going to eliminate X is much less strong in terms of an alternative response than I'm going to add Y, or I'm going to head towards XYZ goal. And part of this is the way the human brain works. The brain doesn't do negatives, right? So if I say to you, don't think about an elephant, the very first thing that happens to you is you start thinking about an elephant, right? You just did. So you need to be thinking about, I'm going to work on what I need to do to be more accepting, or I'm going to work on what I need to do to improve my boundaries, right? Boundaries are important. I'm going to also talk about that. Or, you know what? I actually think I need some professional assistance to get away from these feelings of resentment that I hold, because I don't want to be in thrall of these feelings. I don't want to be limited by these feelings. Sorry, a little word thing there. So, one of the questions is, does lessening of resentment equal forgiveness for things, particularly if one of the things you're resenting is a past injury or even an ongoing issue around not getting things done as well, or feeling like that family project or whatever, where the person who is driving some of that, the non-ADHD or more organized partner, is actually still pushing you, right? So there are things that continue in real time. I would only like to say here that there's a couple of alternatives. Forgiveness is one option, and maybe you would go in that direction. Generally, I think of forgiveness as something that you work on together. You resolve the internal conflicts. That's not how everybody thinks about it. I know Ned Hallowell talks about a gift that you give yourself, and the other person may not even know about it. And his idea is, once you can forgive somebody, you can let go of the negative emotions that are hanging on for you. I like to also think about acceptance. Something has happened. Maybe you won't like it. And forgiveness doesn't mean you like something either, by the way. But you won't let it control you, and sort of moving forward saying, I accept that this is how this is. And now what do I do about it? Now what do you do about it? What do we do it? And making sure that you're aligning that. I just find acceptance is a slightly easier place to get to, and a calm place for people. Forgiveness, I find, has a larger emotional investment, perhaps. Okay. I said I would talk about learning conversations, and resentment and talking about difficult emotions can be really hard, particularly if you've got people who are locked into negative feelings such as anger or resentment. So I want to very briefly introduce you, those of you who don't know, to something called a learning conversation. So this is based on a number of other techniques that are out in the couples therapy world, but it has some ADHD specific things because this is a neurodiverse relationship. So learning conversation, and I talk about these kinds of things in my couples seminar and et cetera quite a bit. So there are ways for you to get more information than this brief overview, but it's a speaker listener technique that is very structured. So there's one person who's talking and one person who's listening, and the listener's job is to only to be able to say back to the person, here's what I heard. I heard blah, 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 blah. The difference between this methodology and others is that I want people to not only say what they heard in the words, in their own words, but also what they heard between the lines. Because a lot of the miscommunications in neurodiverse relationships come from the assumptions of, somebody's motivations because they're similar to you, you know somebody's life experience because you think it's similar to yours. And in neurodiverse relationships, that is not the case. So a lot of the miscommunication is the unspoken stuff. And so that comes out in these as well. So you have the listener who says not only what they heard in the words, but also what they think the rest of the meaning is, because you think I never do anything, or whatever the thing is that they're taking on. The other thing about a learning conversation is they need to be very short in their back and forth. The speaker starts out with like 3 or 4 sentences about an emotional topic, not a logistical topic. And then the person, if it's really long, there are too many ideas held in the conversation to be able to accurately recap all of the nuances and what's going on underneath. And then you change roles only at the point at which the listener hears accurately. So you might have the speaker say 3 or 4 sentences. The listener says, this is what I heard, plus the between the line stuff. The speaker might say, well, you got X part of it correct. That's true. But there's this thing that's a nuance that I want you to understand. This is why it's so useful. It's also almost impossible to escalate, which is why it works so well as a technique for talking about resentment and other difficult emotions. A couple of things just to know, if you try this, I encourage people to start, with set a timer for 15 minutes and try it and see how you do with it. Don't rebut if you are the listener. The listener's job is not to respond. The listener's job is to make sure you understand. This also opens up a lot of opportunity. The reason I call it a learning conversation is you learn a whole lot in these about what your partner's actually thinking versus what you assume they're thinking. And then if you simplify, just assume you don't have to get it out all at once, 3 or 4 sentences, go back and forth, and eventually the thing progresses and you get to a much better place. These are slow conversations, but often very useful conversations. A lot of couples have said they really open up their ability to talk about emotional topics like resentment. I also said improving boundaries was one of the very effective ways to address feelings of resentment, one of the alternative paths to this. And boundaries are not, the misunderstanding is that boundaries are rules that I create, that I tell my partner about, that they have to follow in order to be able to engage with me. That's not what boundaries are. It's not rules for other people. Boundaries are rules for yourself. And I like very much Terry Cole's approach to boundaries. So I teach this one, which is a boundary intensity model. In other words, we have lots of things we think about that we want, that we like, And there's sort of different levels of intensity. At the very top, which in this chart is actually at the very bottom, are the very most important things, which are the deal breakers. These are things which are non-negotiable for you as a person, which if you don't have these in your life, you are not going to, you're not going to be happy, period. So you know what these are. There's usually 2 or 3 of them. There's not a huge number of them. And it really, understanding what they are helps you understand what you can and cannot let go of. As an example, up here might be being dealt with honestly. That might be a deal breaker. If somebody is lying to you on a regular basis, you might decide you don't want to do this. Some people, Terry Cole herself, ended a relationship at one point because one of her deal breakers was she wanted to be with somebody who really loved nature in the same way that she did. And she wanted to be able to go out in the woods and walk around. I mean, it could be anything that's important for you. Desires are the next level down, which are things that are pretty big. We envision our lives looking like this. Like, for example, maybe one of your desires is to have an adventurous life, or maybe one of your desires is to have a certain kind of family life with a partner who interacts with you a certain way, et cetera. These are really important things. And then the final, sort of the lowest level of things are the wants or preferences. You're partial to something, like I would like to have a clean kitchen, or I would like to have, a certain kind of job, or certain kinds of interactions or whatever. But if I didn't have that, that would be okay, right? It's not, I like one option over the other, but I can give up a lot of these things without impinging upon my most closely held boundaries. So when you're talking about resentment, let me bring this back around to the idea of resentment. Resentment, you can take a look at the things like, I really resent that my partner comes into the house and drops everything on the kitchen floor, or doesn't pick things up around the bedroom. You can take a look at that and you can say, so where does that fit into my value system? If your value system is very, let's say you're an architect designer, this is what makes you who you are. You feel really inspired by clean, certain kinds of design things or whatever, to the degree where you don't want to, have the other things in your life, then it's pretty high up for you. If in fact it's more of, I grew up in my household when I was growing up was clean, but when I think about it, I could actually say, you know what, all those socks and underwear on your side of the bed is your stuff. I will put a boundary in place for myself, which says, this is not big enough for me to actually feel resentment about, to actually try to change around. There are other things in my life that are desires or deal breakers that I feel much more strongly about. So as you think about how to move past resentment, there's this acceptance quality as one option. There's improving your boundaries, to really be thinking about your own choices about what you're going to hang on to more difficult feelings about. There are learning conversations to be able to help you talk with your partner about how to deal with feelings of resentment and other difficult emotions that you might have. So there are a number of different paths that you can start to take to start to change your relationship with your own resentment around, and so to improve your relationship. Once you've identified those resentments, once you've come to sort of eyeball to eyeball with what those benefits are of those resentments, et cetera. Okay, so that's a program. I wanted to leave a lot of time here for questions because there were a bazillion questions that were sent in here, and I'm delighted. The first questions I would love to have, if possible, are around the questions around the resentment model that I've shown here, as well as some of the other things. Before I get to that, some resources for you. So if you're interested in exploring more about forgiveness versus acceptance and what that looks like, Janice Spring's book, How Can I Forgive You? The Courage to Forgive and the Freedom Not to, is a really good resource. If you're interested in learning more about Ned Hallowell's, forgiveness is a gift that you give to yourself, he has a very short book, which is nice, which is Dare to Forgive. And then if you're interested more in the Boundary Boss, boundaries intensity work, Terry Cole has a really nice book called Boundary Boss, which I like quite well. There's also a book specifically about resentment, which again, as a general topic, you might be interested in, which is Stephen Stosny's Love Without Hurt. I will warn you that one of the main theories of this book, which I completely agree with, is that you cannot hang on to resentment and heal your relationship. And so he's talking about different ways to do that. There are also a lot of resources that I offer about ADHD relationships more broadly, and my website, which has a lot of information there, including couples seminars for couples who are trying to work through things like parent-child dynamics and stuff, consulting for couples, support groups, and other kinds of, there's a membership program, et cetera. So there's a lot of resources there specific to ADHD impacted couples. So all these resources, different things that you might be interested in what I've talked about. Okay. Is there they think there's something else I need to move through. There we go. The Q&A. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa. That was very eye-opening. Before we start the Q&A, I'd like to share the results of our poll. We asked, if resentment has crept into your close relationship, what was the main cause? The top answers were split between an unbalanced partnership, such as when one person feels like the parent and feels like the other is the child, unresolved conflict, and an unequal division of labor. And then the next set of answers were also split between trust issues, one partner's anger issues or frequent outbursts, and constant criticism. So probably not that surprising. Mm-hmm. Now to your questions. So many people wrote in about how they feel like the parent in their marriage. And there are different variations of this. The non-ADHD spouse points to the forgetfulness, the, not being on time, the disorganization. One says, I'm tired of feeling like I have to manage his life. That's not my role. Another says, her partner says that his intention is good, but when these same problems keep cropping up, at what point are intentions no longer relevant because the result is the same, which isn't good. So these are we have another one where I think what's really interesting is when couples do decide to try and talk about it, the person who, is poorly disorganized or forgetfulness or what have you, feels triggered by the criticism. So there's also questions around, how do we approach this when I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying this didn't happen or this needs to happen. I don't want to criticize you, but how do we get beyond this? How do we get beyond this without you having your feelings hurt?
Yeah.
So maybe we can address that first.
That one first. Okay. So I run into this quite a bit because people will say, I'm just stating a fact. X didn't happen, right? But the reality is there is an unspoken end of that sentence, which is in fact a critique. And so it's very useful for non-ADHD partners and more organized ADHD partners to come to grips with the fact that, yes, they are still critiquing. Because when you say, X didn't happen, the unspoken part of that sentence is because you didn't do it, right? And that's a critique. So one of the things that it's very hard when you are trying to get the trains to run on time, to be more removed from what the other person is or is not doing. This actually relates to the first parts of what you were asking, those questions about, I don't want to manage his life, or his intentions are good, but this stuff keeps coming back, and what do I do? And it also relates to rebuilding trust. So I want to answer all three of these actually sort of as a group. It's okay to state your and desirable to state what you're concerned about. But I think it's more effective to talk about what the impact is rather than what the person did. So rather than saying X didn't happen because you didn't do it, unspoken part of the sentence, it's rather, X didn't happen and the impact on me is Y. It's still a comment on what the person did or did not do, but it is in fact the impact that is important to the speaker versus the correction and the critique of what's happening. And so if you can say, I'm starting to feel anxious because the house is really messy. Can we do something about that? Both of us. Now, I'm not talking about royal we, can we do it and you do it, but as in, the thing that will help resolve my anxiety is that we take this thing on. This is kind of chewy sushi for non-ADHD partners to hear, because they'll say, but then I'm doing some stuff. And I'm like, well, you're already doing stuff. What you're doing right now is critiquing. And so part of the boundary stuff, so non-ADHD partners, to move away from parenting, one of the singly most effective ways to do that is actually to think clearly about their boundaries. And so I will work with non-ADHD partners when I'm doing the couples work around parenting. I would to work really hard with them about ideation around their boundaries, the boundary intensity of the things that they are thinking about these days and that feel uncomfortable to them, and where they fit into that 3-level picture, and then help them brainstorm, like, what actually could you let go of? When X didn't happen, maybe the fact that X didn't happen could be let go of because it's not as important as something else. What it tends to do is it tends to refocus away from specific small tasks towards larger, more important for most people, relationship integration about what's important to them. So in general, these questions are somewhat parent-child dynamics thing. The ADHD partner, and I'll talk about this more in just a second, is really thinking about how do I optimize my management of my ADHD at the same time that the non-ADHD partner is thinking about how do I optimize my boundaries or improve my boundaries so that I'm not in a parental role, regardless of what is going on, and this intention. So you talked about my partner's intentions are good. But after a time, it's not so relevant because the same stuff keeps happening, and the intentions can be good, but the actions are where the rubber hits the road in a relationship.
Yes.
And I think that is true. The actions that I try to get people to look for from an ADHD partner is that the partner is solidly engaged with actively managing their ADHD. Many people who are reading your magazine or articles or coming to these seminars or whatever who have ADHD are in fact actively engaged. Trust is built around a combination and sort of calmness in the relationship is built around a combination of managing your ADHD symptoms as well as you can. And that means having active conversations with your partner about what you are doing, what you're struggling with, what you're not. And also having a lot of transparency around what you are and are not able to be doing at the time, rather than covering up or just going off into the not now time zones, as Ned Howell likes to talk about. So the intentions, you're right, the intentions are not as important as the actions, but the actions don't necessarily mean they will become perfect. The action to look for is I'm fully engaged. I am doing both the what I call leg 1 stuff, which is the brain changing approaches to managing ADHD, and the leg 2 behavioral stuff. That's where the research says these combined do the best. And I'm doing the best I can do. And still some stuff I'm not so good at. And now what do we do with that? That's the relevance for this is where non-ADHD partners lose hope is when they think their partner's not engaged and not trying their hardest, and that and maybe won't. And I think that answers all 3.
Okay. So we also had questions on the flip side from the ADHD partner saying, I have ADHD, and because I function well, my partner has these big expectations of me, but he or she doesn't realize how much I struggle to meet those expectations. They think it's a switch that I can just turn off and on without truly understanding the struggles I have. How do you get your partner to truly understand how ADHD affects you and the manifestations of that?
So this is partially an education about ADHD thing. So a large part of what ADHD partners do is invisible to other people. It's managing the disorganized information that's in there, trying to set hierarchies when that can be difficult. It's dealing with the appeal of immediacy and the things that are in the now versus the things that are in the past or the future, and trying to corral those into a way. You have a reminder system or something like that. A lot of this effort is really invisible. And so part of this is a conversation, maybe a learning conversation around, this is what my brain feels like. These are the things that I have to do that you take for granted, I believe,
Right.
That you don't have to do. Like it's very little trouble for somebody who does not have ADHD, for example, to remember what the number one priority is in a series of things that they've talked about with their partner. Typically, not always, but typically it will take some kind of reminder system and some way to bring yourself back into that an externally created hierarchy for people who have ADHD to do the same thing, because their interest, it's interest driven, right? And their interest is scattered often. And so the hierarchies are harder. It's just one example. So really having conversations around what your ADHD feels like, not as a defensive thing, right? There's an intro to this conversation, which is, I really just want to help you understand how I function, in part because I think that it will help the two of us have a better partnership. And I am also interested in terms of how you function. That's one side of it. The other side of it is setting expectations. So neurotypical people, myself included, often will make the mistake that because they are neurotypical, because their way of thinking about expectations fits more into the fabric. And many times this is also women who culturally are expected to set some of the expectations around how the household runs and et cetera, for better or for worse. There's a sort of an undiscussed thing around expectations. And, I did this too. I was guilty of this, which is like, I was just figuring, well, it should be done this way, or it should be done this way, or the bed should be made every morning, or whatever it is. And finally, I said to myself, who made me queen? Right? It's just like, no, actually, there are two of us in this household, and we should each have a say in what the expectations are, what the highest priority projects are, what each of us is doing with our own bodies or not doing with our own bodies, whether that's engaging in a project or not. You would like to be able to ask your partner to give you the gift of doing X, Y, Z, but that doesn't mean they're required to. All of those things. So if you have somebody who's got really big expectations, understanding how ADHD has a lot of invisible labor, and making sure your partner understands that, and B, having some very real conversations about making sure that both partners have equal status in setting expectations in the household that they both belong to and both are important members of.
Okay. We had questions around communication issues. One spouse says they're fine, but they're really not. Several spouses or partners say that they try to talk to the other. I know you're angry at me, or I can feel that things aren't right. I want to talk about this, but they say, no, I'm fine. It's fine. Mm-hmm. Or there's a big blow up, and then the partner who blew up says, I feel much better now. I feel much better now. And the other person is sort of left not feeling much better. So I'm wondering, in those scenarios, how to get past those particular situations. And I thought that maybe you could give us an example of the learning conversation that you talked about. Maybe you could give us an example of how that would go.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will. And let me, I'll preface it though. When somebody says they're fine when they're not fine, there's two different potential issues there I want to bring up. One is they might actually be fine and you don't believe them because you don't work the way that they work. They might actually have already moved on and be off on something else. That's possible. The other more likely thing is that they're not fine, but they are too self-protected to want to talk about it, either because they're conflict avoidant, because they're afraid that if they talk to you, things will explode in some way or become very uncomfortable for them in some way, or for both of you. Maybe they are feeling like they are going to let you down if they share it. There's usually, peeling back that onion, an underneath emotion there that is keeping them from speaking up. And if I were going to have a learning conversation in that situation, that is what I would have the learning conversation about. What is it that is keeping me from speaking up? Can I explore these issues with you with a learning conversation? So you might, so I'll give you an example. Let's use that as the example. So the speaker might say, I'm concerned about you and about us because when you seem to be upset and I ask you how you're doing, you will say you're feeling fine. And that makes me feel very anxious because I'm not so sure it's true. So that's a couple of, that's a short statement. The listener then would say something like, so you feel anxious because I'm not sharing with you and I'm making this up on the go here. So, and so I'm lying to you. Right. Now that's what was in between the lines for the listener in this scenario, but it isn't what the speaker said. Right. So that's the kind of miscommunication you can have, right? There's you're going to blame me or I'm lying or whatever. Okay. So then the speaker would say in this instance, yes, you're right. I do feel anxious. You got that. That is true. But I don't worry that you're lying to me. What I'm concerned about is that you're not sharing yourself with me. Yes. And then the listener would go back and try to change, get that accurately, whatever. Now they might be tempted to say, okay, but I don't feel like sharing myself with you. Right. That's the rebuttal. And then you have to move backwards, say, no, wait, hold on. You're not the speaker yet. And let's go back to what I'm trying to share with you, that so essentially the speaker's trying to say, I'm concerned. And also they didn't say this, but it's probably under their hurt that you're not sharing with me. So then the other thing, so that's an example of a learning conversation. The other thing that you talked about was blowing up and feeling better. I hear this one a lot, actually, particularly with ADHD or male partners. There's interesting research that suggests that men have trouble self-soothing after conflict. And one of the only ways that they can effectively self-soothe is to blow up and let off steam and go after the person that they're in conflict with, which is hard in relationships. And it does leave, if somebody has blown up at you, it will, if you are neurotypical, it will leave a trail. If you have a very intense now, not now time zone, ADHD thing where everything that's not in the immediate is less present for you, you may be able to move away from somebody blowing up at you in a specific incident, just move into a different project or whatever. But over time, the fact that you have a partner that's blowing up at you repeatedly will leave, no matter what, always leaves scars. And then you have to work through what's under the blow-ups. Why is that expression of anger? It's the calm, still waters things. The steam is underneath, it's building up, and then you get the geyser blow-up thing. And that's a certain style of anger. It serves a certain purpose, which is things are calm until you can't stand it anymore. And then that's another one of those, there's a benefit, but it's not long-term useful as a style. So,
yeah, it sounds like a very destructive pattern over time in particular.
Yeah. Anger, people say, oh, I shouldn't be angry. Yeah, absolutely. If you feel anger, it's not the anger that's the problem. The anger is the flag. Something here needs to be taken care of. Pay attention to it. There's anger here. The angry behaviors, or how you express the anger. You can express anger really constructively. If you're just dumping all over your partner in an angry tirade, that is what's destructive. It's not the anger itself.
So how does the person who blows up get past that pattern of behavior?
So a couple different things. First of all, if this is a person who has ADHD and they, if you describe yourself as somebody who goes from 0 to 100 in, 1 second flat, that's probably an anger dysregulation thing, which is actually physiologically based. Dodson would say that the most effective way to go after physiologically based anger is actually to consider some of the medications that are specifically for that purpose, like the alpha agonists or something like that. Mm-hmm. Another way to do it is to figure out what's driving that anger. Lots of times it's the parent-child dynamic in these relationships, at which point one of the ways to go past the anger stuff is to address the underlying issue, the parent-child dynamics in the relationship, and help that person. Typically that's an imbalanced status. You've got the managerial person and you've got the lower status person. Help even out the status between the partners, and find ways like learning conversations, like maybe weekly emotions meetings. I worked with a couple one time where once a month they got a babysitter for their kids and they went to a local hotel and sort of shared an afternoon of what do we need to talk about? What's the emotional stuff? Ways to hear each other so that the anger could be in a box, essentially, or the difficult emotions. And then they would have a nice dinner together and spend the night. And that was one of the things that kept their relationship together, because they had an outlet that they knew they could count on. So there are a number of different strategies you can use.
Mm-hmm. A few people have asked how to apply this to a relationship with their elderly parents or siblings. Mm-hmm. When the trust is broken or some of the same patterns emerge. Yeah.
So, again, you're dealing with your own feelings. You're not in control of your partner's feelings or of your grandparents or parents or siblings' feelings. It's really hard to come to grips with the idea that you have limited control over this stuff. You'd like to be able to make it all better. So it would be the same structure. You would be looking at your own feelings, looking at perhaps your own value structure. How do I wish to engage with my parents? What do I care about in that relationship? Can I get past or talk with them in a way about, I'm making this up now, I would like you to treat me more respectfully, or I would like to be more connected with you. And what would be the plan then that you would go to try to do that, and see if they respond? They might not respond. At least when you're with your intimate partner, your romantic partner, you can have a conversation around it that the two of you have a stake in improving that relationship. Sometimes that's not the case with siblings, or parents, or whatever. And it's good to recognize that.
Okay. Someone asked about being in a relationship with a narcissist. And some of the common patterns related to that. Does that require special conversations or special tactics?
Yes. Also some assessment. So if you have a partner who is, for purposes of protection or purposes of not being completely self-aware, or who is doing things to satisfy, that feel rewarding in the moment. So these are all qualities that a partner with ADHD might have because of their ADHD. It is not impossible that the label of narcissist isn't actually about narcissism, but is about the ADHD. And so at the first, before you get into thinking about yourself as being with a narcissist, is to really assess what's driving some of those behaviors. It's not that people with ADHD can't be narcissists. For sure they can. And people without ADHD can also be narcissists.
Sure.
And so I'm not saying that, but just be careful before you apply that label. But yes, at the point at which you are working with a narcissist, that is a very specific type of stuff. And you probably want to be talking with somebody professionally about how you're going to respond. You are not in control of how that person expresses themselves or the actions that they take. And your job is to figure out, what do I do about this situation now that I've come to realize that this is not what I thought it was going to be. This is not the fantasy partner that I thought I was marrying or with, partnered with. What's my response going to be here? And what's in my benefit?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess we can take one more question, and we have so many. We had questions around the unreliable ADHD partner over controlling the non-ADHD partner and vice versa. So is there some light you could shed on control issues in a relationship with ADHD and non-ADHD partners? So
non-ADHD partners are usually driven to try to control a situation to alleviate their feelings of anxiety. Wes Crenshaw, who's out in Kansas, and I have this ongoing debate about, do people with ADHD marry anxious people, or do people with ADHD partner with people who then become anxious? Because we know all these things are happening to them, or some combination therein. But controlling behavior. So I would ask ADHD partners to understand that it's very difficult to be with a person who you don't know exactly what's coming next. And particularly if there are kids involved or whatever, that it can be a very anxiety provoking position to be in. And lots of times people will say, I don't feel as if I can let down my guard because I don't know that my partner is going to do what my partner said they were going to do. So that can be very difficult position to be in. On the other side of things, for the ADHD partner, there is this constant critique. And as I said earlier, even saying something that you see as a fact can still pretty easily be interpreted as a critique, particularly if that person is sensitive to critique, which most people with ADHD are, have had so much of that in their lives growing up that they are pretty sensitive to it. And also because actually genuinely it is a critique if you speak the rest of the sentence. So that can be a very difficult thing for the ADHD partner to live with, is to feel as if they're constantly being corrected or put down or diminished or whatever. So this is why these relationships can be very, very difficult, this sort of natural combination. You have to, as a couple, learn how not to do these things. And again, broadly, for the more controlling partner, part of it is getting to the place to figure out what you can and should let go of for the betterment of yourself and your own situation and how you feel about your relationship, and also for the partnership in large, and it fits with your values. And for the ADHD partner, it's this optimizing the management so that you're presenting the best version of yourself. You are as reliable as you can be for your relationship and for your partner. And also both people accepting what the qualities are of the other person. Is all of your anxiety going to go away? Probably not. Are you going to fix all of the ADHD symptom management? Probably not. So, right. There is a coming to terms with, this person is amazing. I married them for certain reasons. The other stuff has gotten in the way. Finding that amazingness again and accepting what you've got.
Yeah. Which that couple did when they went to the hotel. They were able to talk about it and find out again how they're both amazing.
Yeah. And
So
one of the things that this guy did, which I loved, he used to take her when she was in the shower. He's the one with ADHD. He would take her towel downstairs and throw it in the dryer and warm it up and bring it back up to her.
oh,
And I thought, oh my God, that was so wonderful.
so thoughtful. Yes.
There were some wonderful things that he did. She wanted him to be doing other things as well that he wasn't doing.
Right.
But there are things almost always that you can look into to say, this is wonderful, even though that's not so wonderful.
Right. Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your advice and your experience with our ADHD community. We appreciate it. And hopefully we put marriages on the road to healing today. And thank you to everyone here today. If you have ideas for future ADDitude webinars, please share them in the comment box or email us at customerservice@ADDitudemag.com. If you would like to access the event resources, visit ADDitudemag.com and search podcast 594. The slides and recording are posted a few hours after each live webinar. If you're listening in replay mode, simply click on the episode description. Please know that our full library of ADDitude webinars is available as a podcast. It's called the ADHD Experts podcast, and it's available on most streaming platforms. We hope to see you next Tuesday, February 3rd, for our webinar titled Raising Problem Solvers, Not Direction Followers, Strategies to Foster Independence with Our Children with Leslie Josell. And following that, our webinar is How Your Circadian Rhythm Shapes Energy, Focus, Productivity, and Cognitive Functioning on Wednesday, February 11th with Dr. Jamie Zeitzer. Make sure you don't miss future ADDitude webinars by signing up to receive our free email newsletters at ADDitudemag.com/newsletters. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.